Hi, Rick Hansen here with scientist turned Christian, Dr. Steve Osborne.
From the heart to the mic, on the field, on the stage, faith in they step as they turn the next page. Athletes, actors, musicians, authors, and more, sparking the flame, lifting up Jesus unashamed of his name. Life stories of struggle, redemption, and grace. Victories rising from a broken place. Legends of life with a purpose to show how God shows up when you let him flow. Amazing grace, shining bright, living the faith in the spotlight. Hearts on fire, now let it go. Turn it up, it's time to start the show.
Well, we have the pleasure today of, and this is kind of exciting because we've never really had this kind of conversation on Amazing Grace, but today we get to, because we have a scientist who's going to talk about Christianity and how the two kind of work together. Today, our guest is Dr. Steve Osborne, PhD, who is a scientist and has his identity based in science over his many, many years of doing just that. Welcome, Steve. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. I'm going to start right out with just give us a brief indication of what kind of scientist you are.
Okay, I'm an experimental psychologist. And like I tell everybody, that's not the psychiatrist that you go when you're having behavioral problems. The experimental psychology does the sort of the science part of the field. We look at things like how organisms learn, how they acquire and store information and use it, the relationship between brain and behavior and that kind of stuff. So my degree is really in learning, which sounds very subspecialized, and that's because it is just like medicine.
Okay, so that is the basis of where we're going to go with your science story. Let's just jump back quickly. Was there any kind of faith story in your life, even in your earlier life? Did your parents take you to church? Did you have any kind of exposure to Christianity or any religion?
The closest I came to Christianity is when I was in grade school. We lived behind the Methodist church. That was as close as I got.
Okay.
I think I may have gone to a couple of services at the Methodist church because the pastor and his family lived on the grounds, and I think for a while they had a kid about my age. So I think I probably went to some vacation Bible studies once or twice there. But that was it. I lived with my grandparents until I was 10. They were not anything. They weren't necessarily hostile to the faith. They weren't.
Yeah.
You know, my grandfather was very unhappy with Catholics in general. And then my mom and stepfather, the religion, we just never talked about it. It's not that people were anti anything. They just were nothing. And so the whole issue of religion, I have to tell you, I don't ever remember that being a topic the entire time that I grew up.
So science was your thing right from the get-go? Is that what you were interested in school along the way, and that's kind of where you were directed?
It's a complicated story. I come from a long history of super dysfunctional humans.
Really?
Mostly illiterate. Nobody in my family graduated from high school. That included my mother, my stepfather, my brothers, my sister, my grandparents. So education wasn't a big deal in my family. It just wasn't. I'm not even sure anybody could spell the word college.
Yeah.
So,
and here you are, a doctor and with a PhD, and
yes.
Making a living teaching learning, basically.
Yes.
Talk about a flip-flop.
I think everybody's allowed to have a couple of things that they brag about. So let me share with you. So I grew up with, by the way, not that being illiterate is wrong. It's just the way it is. You know, my grandfather had a fourth grade education. He could barely read and write. He was terrible with math. At any rate, so I come out of this family. By the way, I left home when I was 17, made my own way in life. So my brag is I got a PhD, which is pretty good from Boomer, West Virginia, which is where I kind of grew up. And I have 3 sons, two are physicians. They're all college graduates.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, and they have all been married now. I think this year they've all been married 25 years. I have 8 amazing grandchildren and recently a great grandchild. But out of nothing, out of dysfunction, and my wife has a similar dysfunctional background. We've been able to kind of be normal and produce bright kids who are good citizens and functional. Like I say, two of my sons are physicians. They're all college graduates and they're all Christians. And I believe
Wow.
all
That's
of
a
my
success story right there, huh?
no,
Yeah.
no, and I think that's worth bragging about. Not about me, but about what God can do if you just pay halfway attention to what He's telling you. I never dreamed of getting a PhD. And in fact, I got out of the service and I went back to junior college, and I actually spent 6 months in the hospital, was wounded in combat, lost the sight of it, so I got a little bit of disability money, and I went back to school, went to a junior college for a couple of years, and then part of my disability was the VA would pay for my tuition and books. So I thought, where should I go to college? And I thought, we know San Diego is a great place, and they have a university there. And so I applied to the University of California, San Diego, not knowing that it was this insanely academic school. And I only applied one place. It never occurred to me that I wouldn't get in. I thought you applied to college and that was it. And you got in, and it worked like that. So I go down there as an undergraduate, which is a really, really tough school. And realized, I decided to major in psychology, and I realized that a bachelor's degree in psychology would probably help you sell insurance or,
Yeah.
make it be a barista at Starbucks.
But that's
So I
just to be
started
clear,
thinking,
just to be clear now, back in those days, God had nothing to do with it as far as you were concerned. He probably did have a whole lot to do with it as we look back on it.
well,
But
if
at
you
that
look,
time, you weren't relying on prayer or even recognizing that there is a God. Is
no,
that right?
remember, this is my godless pagan portion of my life. I just knew I wanted an education only because I'd spent most of my life doing the lousiest, crappiest jobs imaginable on earth, hoeing lettuce, being a janitor.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way, but I didn't see myself doing that for life, and I knew I needed an education. So I get to San Diego, and they say, well, you got to go to graduate school, and I start thinking, PhD? Are you kidding me? Me get a PhD? It was like, hey, you can either get a PhD or go to the moon and fly around the moon about 7 times and come back. I mean, it was that far removed, and I ended up going to Arizona State. And that sort of, in some sense, started me on the path to science, but it also put me on the path headed towards Christianity.
Really?
And,
Okay.
and the two sort of run along parallel. And then about my third year in graduate school, out of a 4-year doctoral program, is where the lines crossed.
Really? Okay. And so that's where we want to go here. And I want to know what brought your attention to that in the first place. I mean, here you are, your identity is in science, and you really had no regard at all for anything divine. And there must have been some spark there that said, well, wait a minute, I haven't even considered this, right?
Right. So let's pick up the story. I'm a third-year graduate student. I have a wife I love. I've got a couple of kids that I adore, young kids, and I'm being successful. I'm getting my research published. I have the respect of peers and colleagues. In fact, life was going swimmingly good for me. I mean, I was doing everything I wanted to do. The downside.
Who needs God? When you've got all that, who needs God, right? I mean, it's all good.
Exactly. So, other than being desperately poor, and we were, I mean, imagine being a graduate student with 2 kids and trying to live on a stipend from the school and the little bit amount of money I got from the VA, at any rate. So I was doing great. I was about as happy as you could be at that point in my life. The problem was my wife was paying a big price for my success. She was stuck at home with 2 kids. I always had the car. So she really, really, and by the way, I was at school 7 days a week doing research. And when I wasn't doing research, I was dreaming about it. I was not, even when I was off, I was not particularly good company.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah.
so my wife returned to the church of her youth. She had gone to church as a kid. She wasn't a Christian, but she went back to the church. And at the church, she was invited to join a home Bible study. And she came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And by the way, I viewed Christians as people that couldn't handle life without the crutch of faith. I mean, strong people didn't need God, but bless her heart, I didn't think my wife was that strong. Sorry, dear. So I said, and by the way, I've never been hostile to religion. I was just an atheist. I was sort of, at any rate. So I encouraged my wife. In fact, I think I talked her into joining the Bible study because I knew it would be good for her, and it was. Okay.
If
But
nothing
something
else,
really-
if nothing else, just for the social outlet, right? Just to be with other
Yes,
people.
exactly. So something really unexpected happened, and she accepted Christ. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. What?
I was like, what are you doing? And I saw this incredible transformation in a human, quite frankly, that was as close to a living miracle as you can come. It really was.
Wow.
So that really got my attention. But the thing that really kind of I'm sorry, let me kind of back up. So she hosted, and by the way, eventually the Bible study came to our house, and she said, "Can we have it here?" And I said, "Sure." And she thought I should leave, but I decided to hang around and see what this was all about. And I did, and I was only obnoxious a few times. But,
Okay, there's the first entry of Jesus right there, is saying you just need to stick around at this meeting, even though it doesn't seem like you.
And I liked the people. The people were really nice. And they started having these Friday potlucks, and that was nice because we didn't eat very well on our income. So when they had the potluck, I was able to chow down, and the people were super nice. And I actually thought initially, like, these people are being nice so they can spring the gospel on me. I know this is coming.
Put up your guard, right?
Yes, I'm ready. But it never came. The people were nice. We enjoyed each other's company, ate a lot of good food, and that was it. And that really surprised me. But let me go back to the story. So the Bible study ended, and the Bible study leader asked me on the way out, he said, "So where do you stand with God?" And I said, "I'm a man of science, not of faith." Da, 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 da. And he said, "Hey, I understand that." He said, "But listen, would you do me a favor? Would you have breakfast with me this week?" And I said, "Sure." So we meet and we're eating pancakes, and he said, "Listen, I want to give you this book. It's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell." I don't know if you're familiar with the book. It goes way back, but at any rate, and he said, "I'd like you to review this book and tell me what you think from a scientific perspective." Now, of course, that was a ruse. He was appealing to the only way that could appeal to me at the time, and that was my ego. So I get a copy of this book, and I start reading it. And I think I shared with you beforehand, before the show, is I start reading this book, and I'm both stunned and embarrassed. I'm stunned because everything I thought I knew about Christianity was false. I mean, it wasn't like 6 out of 10. I mean, it was 100 out of 100. The
Wow.
other thing, it was embarrassing because here I am. I define myself as a scientist. I teach classes in experimental psych. I tell my students, "Hey, listen, know what you believe, know why you believe it, and why you know it for sure, and what evidence it's based on." And I realized that I was like the world's biggest hypocrite. I mean, I hadn't done what I was telling people to do, and it's hard to explain to people what a shock that was to me. I mean, really, really, really a big shock. So that really got my attention. And by the way, this time people had invited me to Bible studies, and then a friend of mine, a guy named Damien, said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to lead a Bible study, and I'm really, really nervous. I haven't done this before." He said, "You're a pretty smart guy, so would you just come to the Bible study to give me moral support?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that."
Yeah.
And of course, once again, it was just a ruse. By the way, there was a whole group of Christians that were praying like crazy for my salvation.
Unbeknownst to you, that you were not aware of?
Unaware of, and by the way, it's not a fair fight.
You're right there. Yes. Okay.
So I'm going to Bible studies, and then a fellow named Bill invited me to the Saturday morning men's breakfast to the Christians, and I started going to that. And, would go to church with my wife for support. And so the next thing I know, I'm going to church twice a week. I'm in 2 Bible studies. I'm in a men's Christian breakfast, and I'm still a pagan.
Yeah. So at that point, you're still, this is kind of a social thing more than it is anything. Is that right?
Yeah, but they're starting to get my attention.
Yeah.
Okay. And I went from being really, really happy with my life to being miserable a lot, because there was this incredible, I didn't even know the word spiritual warfare, but there was this incredible spiritual battle that I was going through. And I mean, it was really, it's hard to explain how emotional that was. It's sort of the the good and the bad. I mean, I'd wake up at 2:00 in the morning and wide awake, put on a pair of shorts, go outside, sit on a railing fence, and have a cigarette and just look at the sky. And it would be like, this Christianity really looks pretty good. I mean, you really like the people, and it kind of makes sense, right? And then, then I would say, no, that's stupid, that's crazy. I don't want anything to do with this. So there's this tug back and forth. So what I decided is, I figured, look, I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm a scientist, so I'm just going to read through and review the Bible. And if it's false, if this is made up, if this is a myth, I'm smart enough to see that, right? So I start reading the Bible, and I'm really shocked, because it doesn't read like a myth. It doesn't read like somebody made it up. It reads like it's really honest. And you see people saying things, that somebody would never make up. I mean, who would make up a story that makes them look like an idiot? I mean, who makes up a story and says, "Hey, you know what? The evening Christ was arrested, you know what? I denied him 3 times. How do you like that?" I mean,
Yeah.
And then they said, "Hey, I've got a really great idea. Let's women discover the empty tomb." This is the first century. Women were, couldn't testify in court. They were deemed as unreliable witnesses. So I'm saying, what fool makes up a story where women discover the empty tomb?
The title of the book, we haven't even mentioned that yet, is Beyond Chance. And then the subtitle is From the Big Bang to the Empty Tomb. So what about the Big Bang? How did your, in your own mind, start justifying the Bible's version of Genesis and the Big Bang Theory, one being 7 days and the other saying the Big Bang Theory is like a million years of evolution?
Okay.
Your scientific mind, how did that sort it all out?
So, by the way, let me just finish my story really quick, because it's just a couple of lines.
Okay, I'm going to just a couple of seconds.
A couple of seconds. So here we are.
It's all yours, Steve.
I've been to the men's breakfast, and my friend Damien said, "Hey, listen, I'm in this evangelism class, and I need to share this thing called the 4 spiritual laws." And I said, "Sure." And when he got to the end and said, "Would you like to pray?" it was like everything that made me reluctant was gone. Every question was answered. I knew I was ready, and I accepted Christ at that point, and became. Well, actually, I gave God a 40-day trial, sort of like. No, I'm serious, and I said, "Okay, God, here's the deal. I'm going to give you 40 days, and if I feel this way in 40 days, I'm all in, and if not, I'll just go back to being a pagan." Now, of course, I never looked back, and I've been a Bible-believing Christian for about getting close to 50 years.
Wow.
So,
Terrific.
one of the things that has bothered me really since that point was the misperception that there is an incompatibility between science and Christianity or science and the Bible. In fact, I read a poll recently that even up to 49% of Christians think the two are compatible. You know, I know the statistics. We send young Christians away to college, and a lot of them end up abandoning their faith, and 50% of those do so because they think science has disproven the Bible. So the gist of Beyond Chance, it begins with the creation of the universe, but the gist of Beyond Chance is to provide scientific evidence, not here's some faith, just believe this, but scientific evidence that clearly demonstrates the existence and the majesty of God. Okay. And I believe not just there, but the whole book walks from the beginning of the universe to first life on Earth to the diversity of life, what we call evolution, through human evolution and the creation of Adam and Eve, and why people are so remarkably unique. And as we walk through, if you will, creation from front to back, the handiwork of God is clear from beginning to end. And that's what the book is all about. Okay. And not believe me, not, hey, here's great. Just trust me, have faith. Here is the evidence, and you, reader, evaluate the evidence. And I'm going to tell you what I think it says, but you decide for yourself.
So that gets, so the person that wants to jump in, the scientific mind wants to jump in and find out what that evidence is. That's going to be found in the book. And it's written in such a way that it's digestible by virtually anyone, right? It's not.
Yes,
it doesn't take a scientific mind to figure out what you're talking about.
Absolutely not. The published version of the book is the 22nd version of the book. I probably spent the last 8 or 9 versions trying to simplify the science in the book to the point where anybody could read the book. I've edited it to a 9th grade reading level, and literally I think anybody 12 or 13 years old or older can pick the book up and read it. I've had some of my grandchildren, when they were teenagers, read the book, and I think people will find that it's very readable. So that's a really important point, because this is a book about science, but it's a book for the average believer. You don't need a lab coat to read this book. And incidentally, there's a phrase that I just came across a couple of days ago, and it started in the 1600s with the Royal Society of London, and it's their motto. And I'll probably mispronounce this, but it's nullius in verba, which is Latin for take nobody's word for it. So I kind of want that to be the motto for my book. Don't take my word for it. I don't want you to believe what I say. I don't want you to believe this because you think it's consistent with the Bible, which it is, incidentally. I want people to look at this and discover for themselves. And what they will find is the evidence is really overwhelming. It really is. I mean, I don't think I'm exaggerating. Incidentally, if people go to my website, steveosbornebooks.com, first of all, they can watch about a 75-second trailer, but you can also download the first chapter and read it for free.
One of the things I think you said, I read one of your lines is that you ultimately concluded that it required more faith to remain an atheist in the face of science than to become and believe in Christ and become a Christian.
By far.
Yeah.
By the way, by a magnitude of 10 times harder to be. The problem with atheists is they don't believe anything. I mean, so, okay, support your position of an atheist. Well, I don't believe anything. Well, that's kind of hard to believe. All the atheists can try to do is to tear down the evidence for Christianity. And by the way, I have to say, they've done a pretty good job of that. I think they've really been dishonest in that. Okay. But they've done a pretty good job. But let me give you, by the way, I'm going to tell you two facts, and I think these are astonishing. The two most significant things that's happened in the history of time is the birth of the cosmos and the beginning of life on Earth. Right? Right?
Yeah.
Now, science cannot explain either one of those. And if you don't believe me, then you're going to have to belly up and read my book, because it will show you. And by the way, it's not close. It's not close. And by the way, the universe does have a beginning. We call that the Big Bang. All right. Incidentally, science believed adamantly for about 150 to 200 years that the universe had existed forever. And now we know that's not true. And that in the beginning, God did create the heavens and the earth. At least somebody did. And if the universe had a beginning, then if science can't tell us why, or then we have to say, well, what did cause the beginning? Okay. And I could say, well, it was God, which is true, but frankly, that's not particularly scientific. That's more faith. So what, by the way, you'll find in the first chapter is there are 5 criteria that are needed to create the physical universe that we enjoy today. And if you look at the Bible, you'll find out that God meets all 5 of those criteria perfectly.
And now let's talk quickly about the resurrection. And you say that historically, the resurrection makes nothing but great sense. And some people think, well, really? He rose from the dead? Come on now.
I know. All right. So the last two chapters are about the empty tomb. The first of those chapters goes through all of the evidence for the resurrection. There are 5 areas. The crucifixion and death of Christ, the empty tomb. By the way, these are facts that the disciples truly believed they had seen a resurrected Christ. Now, we can argue whether they did or didn't, but they clearly believed they did. Then we have the conversion of Paul and his ministry, and the conversion of James, Jesus' half-brother, and his ministry. So if you're going to explain the empty tomb, or if you're going to explain the resurrection, you have to accommodate all 5 of those areas of evidence. All right. So naturalists have tried to come up with different theories to explain all of that evidence. And there are a bunch of theories. And by the way, in chapter 13, we go through all of those theories and say, okay, can any of these alternatives explain all 5 of these areas of evidence? And the answer is not even close. Not even close. In fact, some of the evidence is so overwhelming. If you know the story of the transformation of the disciples, it's crazy. So anyway, so when you go back, there's myth theories, and we stole the creation account from other pagan things. There's the swoon theory that says Christ didn't die on the cross. He was just unconscious, and then he was revived in the cave, and that's how we do it. So there are all of these theories that try to explain that data, and I walk through all of them. And the sad truth for atheists and skeptics is you cannot account for all of the data with the different theories. And in fact, the resurrection of Christ comes as close to being a historical fact as you can come without being a historical fact. And I think it would be a historical fact, except we know we can't please God without faith. So there has to be a little bit of faith at the end. But I will tell you that the evidence for the resurrection of Christ, as with the scientific evidence for his existence, is overwhelming. It truly is overwhelming.
So your book could be considered an apologetic. That's what kind of is
Yes.
the kind of book it is, which basically is trying to make sense of the case for Christ. And in fact, one of the books by an apologist is Lee Strobel, who wrote that book, The Case for Christ. He was a journalist, so he took it from that angle. And then there was C.S. Lewis, who wrote the book, The Most Reluctant Convert, and he was one of the greatest thinkers of his time to try to make sense of it all. And those are maybe 2 standouts. And now we've got the scientist, Stephen Osborne, who is telling us that science also justifies everything that we know about Christianity.
Incidentally, the landscape of people, including a lot of scientists who set out to disprove the Gospels, are now Bible-believing Christians, and many of them dedicated the rest of their life to ministry. Francis Collins, who he and I probably disagree on some things, but he was an atheist, became a Christian. He was very much involved in the Human Genome Project, was the director of health for about, 10 years or so. Incidentally, I actually have another book that's written. I set out to write two books. I decided to publish this first because I think it's the more interesting of the two. But part of the other book is the life. I summarize the life story of people who set out to disprove the gospel.
I want to know. So, for in your mind, what would be the best hope that you would have for these kinds of readers to take from your book beyond chance? Thank you. My mind went for a minute. Okay, so reader number one, who is the cynic, the person not only doesn't believe in God, but what would you hope that they would get from the book or take from it?
I would hope that I could demonstrate to the cynic that there's enough evidence there to lead him to take a second look at Christianity. Nobody's going to read this book and be converted. This is an intellectual book, and by the way, part of accepting Christ is intellectual, but it really comes from the heart. So, but I don't think the heart will go where the head won't lead it. So for me, by the way, personally, the book Christianity had to make sense to me. Yeah. I wasn't willing to commit intellectual suicide to become a Christian or to give up 10 IQ points. Yeah. So what I found instead was becoming a Christian made me a stronger scientist, not a weaker scientist. And if an author can have a favorite quote since they wrote it, my favorite quote of the book is, "True science doesn't erase God, it reveals him."
Perfect. What about just the skeptic, the guy that's kind of like interested and maybe has had a background in spirituality? What would they pull from the book? Where would you take them on that journey?
I think once again to force is the wrong word, but expose them to evidence. And I tried to write the book kind of in an engaging style. In other words, could this happen? Could this happen? What do you think about this? I think the intelligent force was God, but you can make up your own mind. So it is clearly has a Christian apologetic bias. I mean, the whole point of the book is to support Christianity, but I think it's objective enough and engaging enough to get people's attention. I try to go back in my own life and say, I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in God. What would I think if I read this book? I think it would get my attention. Now, like I say, nobody's going to read this book and run down and fall at the altar and accept Christ. Well, it would be nice if that happened, but I'm not shooting for that. For the skeptic, I want to get their attention and say, hey, look, there's enough evidence here. Take a good, serious, honest look.
What about believers? How about believers? Do anybody need to read that book if they're already a believer?
Well, by the way, I would hope that every believer would read it. And I think there are a couple of reasons why I feel that way. First of all, I honestly wrote the book to try to honor and glorify God. And by the way, that only happens if people read the book. I think they will be uplifted to see that the book does in fact honor and glorify God. But the other thing, I believe it will strengthen people's faith. One of the things that it shows is that Christianity and the Bible are compatible, that Christianity and science actually are, I want to say this, are sort of not co-equal, but work together to reveal the truth. Okay. Science and Christianity actually reinforce one another. So I think that believers will find their faith strengthened, and I'll make a recommendation. If any of your listeners have high school or college kids, please buy or steal or whatever, get a copy of this book and have them read it. If you have to, pay them to read this, because their events, especially if they're going to go away to college. College is a really dangerous place in today's world,
Yeah.
and they're going to go into a godless college where being a Christian is not cool at all.
Yeah, and we
So,
live in a much more secular world today than we ever have before, especially in America,
Yes.
anyway. And
Yes.
so, having ammunition, being fortified with the ammunition that what you explain in the book is usable as you kind of tell the gospel story, for sure.
Yes. And I think, once again, the evidence is so compelling. So if you go away to college and somebody's giving you a bedtime in biology, you'll say, okay, Mr. Smart Guy, so explain to me in 50 words or less how first life arrived on Earth. By the way, ask the biology teacher with the PhD in biology. He'll hem and haw, and he might talk about the RNA world hypothesis, and he'll have a bunch of what I call humma, humma, humma. The truth is, they cannot explain it. That particular event still remains the greatest unsolved mystery in all of science. And incidentally, science will never solve that, because you can't get from non-life to life without intelligent help. And by the way, that's not an exaggeration. I bit my house on that one.
Okay. All right. So, we have, we're out of time. I mean, I just absolutely love this conversation. We try to keep these to, a reasonable amount of time so that somebody could listen to it on the way to the work or as they're jogging or whatever. So we've given them the nuts and bolts of what you're all about, what the book's all about. The next step for our listeners is to just go get the book and take a look at it. It's out now, or it's going to be out shortly.
It's out now, and I would direct people to my website, steveosbornebooks.com. There's a lot of information about the book. You can download the first chapter. There's information about me. So if you really want to know about the book, and if you care about my background, there's a ton of information on the website. There's a link on the website that'll take you to Amazon if you choose to buy the book. Like I say, you can read the first chapter for free.
Let's make it a top-selling book. Let's do that for sure.
By the way, it's my prayer that the book will sell well, not because of me. I mean, I've sort of had my hoorahs in life, and I'm happy with that. But if people buy the book and read it, then I come a little bit closer to honor and glorifying God, which has been my original and continuing purpose.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen Osborne. What a great time we've had together. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
By the way, there's hardly anything that I like better than talking about science and Christianity and faith and how science and Christianity intersect. I mean, I could talk way longer than you could listen.
Thank you, Stephen. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
All right, my privilege. Thank you.
Hey, if today's conversation stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Lean into it. Chase the truth. Thanks for joining us on Amazing Greats and our heartfelt conversation with Dr. Stephen Osborne. His book is called Beyond Chance, From the Big Bang to the Empty Tomb. Share this episode with your doubting friends, and we'll see you next time.